Well, what is it that actually makes business class business class? Is it the cost of the ticket? Is it the airport experience or the in-flight experience? Is it just having business class on your ticket? What is it that actually classifies that? Today, from Buenos Aires to Los Angeles via Bogota, we're going to figure out exactly what Avianca classifies as business class and what they classify as an upgraded economy experience. And after returning my rental car and walking under the colorful awnings this night in Buenos Aires airport, I stumbled across the three terminals. To the far left, where we're going to be heading, is Terminal A, which is the international arrivals and departures. In the middle is the new grand Terminal B, which is actually still under construction, but I'm super excited to check out when that does open. And to the far right is Terminal C, which is going to be all of the domestic arrivals and departures. Buenos Aires actually operates as a 24-hour airport, and so this flight on Avianca from Buenos Aires to Bogota was actually scheduled for a 2 a.m. departure. However, we did have a significant delay on departure due to an incoming aircraft. The check-in kiosks here at Buenos Aires airport opened 3 hours before the scheduled departure, and considering I had been spending the entire day wandering around Buenos Aires, I was more than happy to get to the airport a little bit early and wait in the extremely long lines to check in for my flight. Now, the mobile check-in for my phone for this flight actually wasn't working on the Avianca app, and no matter how hard I tried, they actually would not let me in the line, rather forcing me to go to the self-service kiosk in order to finish my check-in process before I could even get in line to talk to an agent. The agents in the Avianca line were only there to accept checked baggage and were not there to check people in or take care of their seats or anything of that kind. Kind of a bummer considering I was really hoping to talk to someone. The benefit is that actually with these kiosks, considering that there is no such thing as a business class product on this flight today, I was able to upgrade to the extra room, which is traditionally a business class seat, for no additional cost because it hadn't been booked by the time of check-in. And now with my business class economy ticket and my suitcase, I decided rather than waiting in the long line to check my bag as originally planned, I would just grab my bag and head upstairs to security and skip what looked to be about a 30-minute plus wait. Now, I should mention the two planes that we're going to be flying on in this video, both the A330 and the 787 with Avianca, have business class cabins. However, because they're not transatlantic flights, Avianca actually does not market them as business class. Instead, everyone on the plane is traveling in economy, and you can pay a slight fee in order to get these seats. For example, I paid a total of $300 for my flight from Buenos Aires to Los Angeles via Bogota, and for each seat upgrade it was $300. I ended up paying that for the flight from Bogota to Los Angeles, and the flight from Buenos Aires to Bogota, which we're going to be getting on first, I was able to get for free at the time of check-in because nobody had booked it, and since it was still considered an economy class experience, there was no additional fee. Now, at this hour, when I arrived at the airport, it was about 11 p.m. and the airport was fairly empty, only a few flights leaving, including a couple American Airlines flights to Miami and a couple flights going to Mexico as well. One interesting thing I've noticed about the Argentinians is that they love their Outback Steakhouse. I noticed a few of them scattered around the city, as well as an Outback Steakhouse food truck right outside the airport. One of the main unfortunate things about departing at a 2 a.m. flight is that pretty much every shop is going to be closed in the entire airport, including the Shrine McDonald's. Now, Terminal A here at Buenos Aires Airport actually has lounges in a few different places. First thing is going to be at the far end of the terminal, where you're going to notice the EZE Lounge, which is part of the airport lounge, and while I didn't go upstairs to check that one out, it does look like any sort of paid lounge that you would expect to see. In addition to that, across from gate 14 and 15 is going to be the main lounge for Aerolíneas Argentinas and all of the SkyTeam partners, as well as the Centurion Lounge for American Express customers. And lastly, the lounge that we're going to be checking out today across from Gate 9 is the Star Alliance Lounge, which is still fairly new to Buenos Aires Airport, so I was excited to check it out, as well as also the American Airlines and One World lounges and the LATAM Lounge as well. Once you get to the top of the stairs, you're going to notice a few lounges. On the right side, you're going to see the One World Partners Lounge with American and Iberia, and to the left side, you're going to see the LATAM Lounge for those passengers traveling business class on any LATAM flight. Just past the One World Partners Lounge, however, is the entrance to the Star Alliance Lounge, and down a very long hallway, you walk to the front desk. Past the check-in desk to the right is where you're going to find all of your refreshments and food options in this lounge. It was still pretty late night, and so they were actually doing a bunch of cleaning at this time, but there was still plenty of food selections out to keep me tied over for a couple hours, especially considering that my flight was going to be delayed. Unfortunately, there was nothing too filling. Most of the stuff they had was different forms of bread, both entree and dessert, and on the other side they had some salads, but no major protein items for me. Enough to keep me tied over. They did have some cold cuts next door to that, along with some vegetable soup, so I took advantage of that, knowing that I was going to get some sort of food or refreshment on my flight. Now, because there was a couple Star Alliance flights scheduled to depart around the same time, the lounge started to fill up little by little, and so I decided to, before I picked up any food, to go scope out a seat. But shortly after I had my window seat picked out, or at least whatever you would call a window seat, I went and took advantage of the food options. Today I went with a quinoa caprese salad with balsamic vinaigrette on it, some cold cuts with cheese, and a nice cup of coffee. Now, if you haven't been in a lounge at 1 a.m., I will tell you it's sort of a strange experience considering the staff is cleaning up and preparing for the next day. All throughout the entire time we were in the lounge, they kept closing separate areas to sweep, vacuum, mop, clean, and rearrange the food as well. Here you can see some of the flights that were coming out of Buenos Aires throughout this time. A few of the flights actually were using this lounge, however, the only flight that was delayed was my flight to Bogota. Now, after a full day of wandering around Buenos Aires, I decided to take advantage of their shower service, and they gave me a buzzer while they prepared my shower. However, by the time they called for boarding, my shower had still not been prepared, so I had to turn in my buzzer and head out on my way to my boarding gate. Gate 3 housed our flight today. After the Aeromexico flight left, our flight was able to take its spot, and when I got to the gate, it seemed they weren't even ready for boarding yet, and I'm kind of upset that I didn't take full advantage of my shower. And now I have to say, when I showed up to the gate and saw the Star Alliance Avianca A330, I was super excited because they only have one of these painted this way in their fleet, and I was super privileged to get on that for today's flight. In addition, they swapped every other day between A330 and 787 on this exact flight, and I was excited to get the A330 on the first flight, considering I had the 787 on the second flight so that I could compare and contrast the two. Finally, 2.5 hours after our scheduled departure, they called for boarding, and I was one of the first people to get down the jet bridge. However, when we got about halfway down the jet bridge, we were actually stopped by an Avianca staff member who told us they actually were not ready, and we stood in the jet bridge for an additional 15 to 20 minutes actually, while they did some more checks before we were able to get on board. Now, speaking of interesting things you'll find at airports, thanks to Cubana's national airline, you can see the Ilyushin 96 stamp here on the parking spots, considering that before COVID they actually were still bringing that aircraft to Buenos Aires as part of their regular scheduled routes. And despite not a single member of the crew or gate team working to get us on board in an efficient manner, we were finally able to get on board our A330. And when we got on board, we were told multiple times that we needed masks. However, nobody in the airport, nobody at the gate team, and nobody prior to this moment told us we needed masks. It's fine, but I wish they had told me sooner because I didn't actually have one with me at the time, so I had to borrow one from a passenger. However, I did have multiple flight attendants critique me for not having a mask until I got one. We've arrived here, however, at seat 3K, which is going to be my business class seat, or so it's called. Now, a fair warning, if you have a rollerboard, it actually does not fit down the aisle, so I actually had to carry my suitcase down the aisle, which not a huge problem, but it was somewhat interesting that they didn't have enough space. Now, the seats here are definitely old-fashioned, but considering that all I needed to do was sleep on this flight as I headed to Bogota, it was alright. The other thing I want to show you is the seat controls, but more so than that is just how dirty this seat was. You can see all kinds of dirt, all kinds of gunk and everything around the seat, and I couldn't help but just feel a little bit dirty when I got off of this airplane. Over my shoulder even, it looked like my reading light had created some sort of burn mark, which was interesting, to say the least. Below that, however, though, was the charging ports, including some charging ports that honestly were kind of surprising to see, including the charging port with no grounding service, an Ethernet cable, and it was just a kind of a strange combo to have in a sort of outdated cabin. I guess it makes sense. Now, for being generous, the overhead bins were pretty darn small. Now, the benefit of that is that it did make this cabin feel very large, so that was a nice touch. However, if you do have a bigger bag, it's not really going to fit up there, and so I am curious in the economy cabin just how well it works out. Now, the benefit of this seat is that it actually does have quite a bit of storage. We saw all the storage in front of me, and on top of that, there's these large cubbies in the front of the center console for both seats to use. A little bit more of a look here at the other armrest I have, just as dirty and just as hard as a rock, to say the least. Footrest was a little bit interesting. I couldn't tell what was supposed to look like what, if it was supposed to be all connected or if it was supposed to be separate parts, but it definitely was not connected. The crew then came around with blankets, pillows, and headphones for all the passengers on board, and they were very minimalistic, but I just had to remind myself that I technically had booked an economy fare with a business class seat, but none of this was considered a business class product by any means. Now, I will say that it was actually particularly warm this day in Buenos Aires, and unfortunately, since the door was left open for so long, the cabin got super warm, and more warm air kept rushing in, and there was no overhead air vents or any individual air outlets for any of the seats on this airplane. After plugging in my headset, I figured it was about time to figure out my footrest situation. Unfortunately, it went all the way to the floor half the time, and so half the time it wasn't even able to actually support my feet, even in the reclined position. But I finally was able to get it at least where I wanted it for flight. The next task was figuring out this weird piece that it was leaned up against. I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be connected to my seat or the footrest, but it was kind of sticky and kind of uncomfortable, and all in all, it was just kind of a strange experience as far as where to put my feet. Then I figured I'd test out the remote that was actually next to my left leg attached to the center console, so I pushed the button to release it and nothing happened. So I pushed it again and nothing happened. I tried prying it out with my fingers and nothing happened, and I just, no matter what I tried, could not get my remote out of its socket, including trying to use the cord attached to it to get it out, so I had to write off the remote for that sake. Looking at the remote a little bit further, we noticed that if I look to the side, there was a bunch of scratch marks here indicating that I'm not the first person that's really struggled to get this remote out of its spot. The seat controls were basic, however I did like how many things it could control. The only drawback is that if you notice, the lights on my seat control panel were burnt out, and the lights on the seat next to me were working the entire flight. Now over my shoulder was the charging ports as well as an Ethernet cable, which was kind of strange, but if you look at the USB port on my side, the left side here, you'll notice that it's got a huge crack in it. My USB port actually did not work the entire flight, so I was down to one charging port. Luckily, nobody sat next to me. Now for the headrest, it is adjustable. However, if I lifted mine up and put any pressure on it, including my head, half the time it just slid right back down, and so it wasn't actually fully able to support my head. But when I was in a lie flat position, it worked well enough. Now as far as food and drink storage goes on this flight, there was a pizza slice sized rotating piece here that could hold a drink, as far as the center console goes as well, and then in front of you there was room for literature and what looked like a space to store a water bottle in a somewhat interesting fashion on the seat backs in front of us. Now one thing that did make me pretty nervous when I got on board is that there was 4 babies that cried almost the entire flight and 2 dogs in the same cabin with me that whined almost the entire flight, and that was just in my cabin. They made a lot of noise and I was nervous I wouldn't be able to sleep at all. Luckily I was tired enough to sleep, but on a 2 a.m. departure that was one of the last things I wanted to see when I got on board. Then I went to use the restroom while boarding was still completing, and this is after they had completely finished servicing the airplane. You can see things left open, things left dirty and cracked and marked. It was just kind of an ugly looking bathroom, to say the least. I know the plane's a little bit outdated, but I mean, come on, Avianca. In addition, here's your flower holder that was left empty and extremely dirty. It was just kind of a bad feel. One thing I will say is that the in-flight entertainment screens before your departure actually just showed plenty of clips from different destinations and countries around Central and South America, and they did a fantastic job of selling me on places that I had never really even considered visiting at this point in my life. Fortunately, the doors were shut, and looking around my cabin, it was actually fairly empty, and those that were there I didn't really have line of sight with, so that was nice, including the seat next to me left open for me to store anything else that I needed room for, and most importantly, using the chargers. Now, another interesting story as we taxi out is that usually on departure the lights are kept dark, and it's made so that if there's some sort of evacuation, it's easy for the passengers. However, on this departure roll, lights were kept on, the in-flight entertainment screens and music were kept playing, and it was just kind of an interesting takeoff experience. But with that, let's actually head to our takeoff in Buenos Aires.
Silla Premium, una experiencia renovada. Silla Plus, más comodidad y mejores precios. Silla Economy, precios bajos para todos. Esperarás pronto tu próximo vuelo. Avianca.
Now as we depart and say goodbye to the city lights of Buenos Aires, I do have to say that unfortunately the flight attendants on this flight were pretty short with most of the passengers and didn't have a totally great attitude. For the most part, flight attendants have this passion for flying and aviation, or at least they're pretty good at faking it while they're working on the job. These flight attendants just didn't really seem like they wanted to be there, and it was apparent in all the conversations I had with the passengers throughout the entire flight from takeoff to landing. And this was the exact moment that, my God, was I wishing that my seatback remote was working, because that screen was way too far from me, and I would have done anything just to be able to pull this remote out and control my TV from there. Instead, I ended up unbuckling in order to get all the way to my seat to touch whatever buttons I needed. Now, using the seat next to me to show you, these are the two preset modes on the A330 seats. This is considered the relax mode. In all honesty, it's got some recline, but there's nothing too special about it. However, you do have the individual controls as well. And this is the bed mode. You'll notice that it is not completely flat. It actually does lie at a little bit of an angle, which is nice because I usually don't go completely flat anyway, but this was a pretty steep angle considered it was marketed as a lie flat seat. Now, in addition, Avianca's in-flight entertainment system had some fantastic options. I couldn't figure out if it was 10 years in the past or 10 years in the future. Now, yeah, I know that it has things like iPod, which of course makes it 10 years in the past, but things that are so innovative that you don't even see anything similar to nowadays. Like the feature iPod makes it that you can connect your iPod directly to the seat, and you can use that cable in order to have a connection between your personal device and the seatback TV, which some airlines are starting to institute via Bluetooth now, but it's still not a given. In addition to that, for example, was this feature called Sky Office. TextMaker was one of the applications you could launch on that, and the screen, while admittedly tough to launch, after you process that and shows your language, turned into your own personal computer where you could connect your keyboard and whatnot to the seat and actually create your own documents and continue to work as if you were in your own office without even leaving the comfort of your airplane seat. In addition to that was also Plan Maker and Presentation, where you had access to basically Microsoft Excel and a Microsoft PowerPoint equivalent right here on your seatback TV. A fantastic feature before laptops were super mainstream, and I can't even imagine seeing this on some sort of feature like today. Granted, everyone does pretty much travel with their own personal laptops, but having this on a seatback TV was something that I never expected to see. In addition to that, you had things like the Sales on Board, which is basically an onboard duty-free store, and of course the normal flight map that you have on most flights nowadays. But the seatback TV on this was truly old-fashioned. It felt like taking a step back in time, and actually the in-flight entertainment on my 787 flight was completely different than this. The entertainment was pretty normal on this, either music or video, and the selection for video honestly was not that great. However, just judging by how old-fashioned a lot of the stuff on the screen was, I didn't have such high expectations. It was plenty for my flight though, considering that I slept for most of it. But if you were trying to stay awake for an entire flight, especially if it were a transatlantic flight, I would expect you to struggle slightly to find certain things to watch the entire time. Shortly after, they came around with the in-flight offering as far as snacks go. Now remember, this is an economy class ticket. I just upgraded to a special seat, but everything on this plane is economy. So everyone got the exact same food, including this very dry sandwich, this very interesting chicken flavored chip type snack, and Oreos with a bottle of water. Interestingly enough, the tray table actually didn't open all the way. You'll see here it kind of got stuck. And the only way I could get it all the way open is if I lifted it up and over the center console, which maybe was the design, but it just seemed kind of odd, and then it sat at a little bit of a slope. One thing I will mention is that the headphones they hand out were basically like having two rocks squeezed on either side of your head, and actually the left earphone on my headset was burnt out. I would have used my own headphones, however, plugging them into the jack actually made it so that nothing worked, and so if I wanted to listen to anything, I had to use the headphones that they gave me, which was unfortunate because I fell asleep with them on and woke up with ear pain. That being said, I decided to take advantage of this time to actually lay down with my blanket and pillow they gave me and get whatever sleep I could on my way to Bogota, so I will see you in the morning. And good morning somewhere from about 40 minutes outside of Bogota, Colombia. The seat actually was extremely uncomfortable to sleep in. I kept hitting the hard plastic sides with my hips, and so I actually used the extra pillow and blanket from the seat next to me to cushion me to give myself a little bit of a buffer between me and the hard plastic. In addition to that, the footrest being a hard metal made it so that when I woke up, my feet were absolutely killing me from resting on this hard metal for hours. What I will say though is that the seat cushion itself was actually pretty comfortable. Just considering how old it was nice and worn in and had a nice big hole for me to sleep in. Well, everybody, welcome to Bogota, Colombia. Figured it's about time that I reflect on my first of the 2 flights on this journey, and with my opinion, I have to say I think it is time for the A330 of Avianca to either be updated or be left to the dust. Unfortunately, it's just a little bit outdated, things aren't great, and the absolute peak of the flight was the fact that they basically had Microsoft Office on the seatback TV, which, while cool, is kind of upsetting and sad that that was the peak of the flight. The seat was a little worn in and uncomfortable and definitely dirty, and so it's time for them to either revamp the cabin or get rid of it altogether. And with that, here's one last look at the seat that takes couch-style business class seats to the next level. The completely worn-in couch that I just sat in for about 6.5 hours of my life. Now, with that being said, it's time to grab my suitcase, try and squeeze down the aisle that I don't fit down with my suitcase, and head out to customs here in Bogota. Now, because my layover here in Bogota took the better part of a day, considering it was still only 8 a.m. and my next flight didn't depart until late in the afternoon, I decided to fully clear customs as opposed to leaving as a transiting passenger. This meant that I fully entered the country of Colombia, and when I came back for my connecting flight to Los Angeles, I re-entered as if it was a standalone flight. So I went to baggage claim, collected the bag that I didn't actually check, walked past the duty-free stores, out through customs, and out to the curb where taxis and rental cars awaited me. And when I got out to the curb after grabbing my Starbucks coffee and checked to make sure that my next flight was still indeed on time, I headed out to plenty of taxis and rental cars waiting for me. But you guys just stay tuned, because in just a few seconds here, we'll be back at Bogota El Dorado Airport as we get on board our 787, heading on to Los Angeles, California. Later on that same day in Bogota, we are back at El Dorado International Airport. We're going to hop on board the slightly more futuristic version of Avianca's fleet, the Boeing 787-8, in their business class or not so business class cabin from Bogota up to Los Angeles to see the second part. Now, this part of El Dorado's airport is actually pretty much exclusively Avianca Check In. Once inside, you'll see they separated actually into both international departures and domestic departures, considering that depending on where you're going, you're actually going to head to a different gate area. We headed over to the international flights check-in area, which was housing all the flights going to Europe, and then there was also specific counters for those flights that were heading to the United States and Canada. Now, just like being in Buenos Aires, they actually did not let us get in line to talk to an agent before we headed to the check-in kiosks. So we had to head to those kiosks first, complete our check-in, get our bag tags, and all that kind of stuff before we got in line to talk to any sort of agent. Now, something unique that I noticed about Bogota's airport here is that there's actually a large amount of shops and restaurants before you even pass through security. Upstairs there you can see a general market for food, and pre-security here is a ton of markets for souvenirs, gifts, and anything you could need for your flight. So it's almost like a miniature mall before you even reach the security checkpoint. Now, Bogota's El Dorado Airport is separated basically into 2 parts. On the left side is all of the domestic departures and arrivals, and on the right side is all of the international departures and arrivals. So if you pass through check-in to the left, you can just pass through the domestic, normal TSA type security and off to your gate. But if you are departing to an international destination, you are going to have to pass through on the right side here through the passport control and immigration before you get onto your gate area. Through security here at Bogota's airport, we'll actually pass through, of course, duty-free stores, all kinds of stuff that you can purchase and get into your country tax-free. Up above, we see the Avianca Lounge, which we will most definitely check out after we spend a little bit of time walking around the terminal. The international wing of Bogota's airport is basically just one super long hallway, which has all the gates and shops for the most part lined up against the wall on the right side here. One of the things that Bogota absolutely gets correct in their airport is the sheer amount of shops and restaurants they have available to every passenger, so even if you have a long layover and you aren't entering a lounge on that trip, there is still plenty of options for you to eat and plenty of souvenirs for you to purchase if you have not gotten a chance to get what you needed while you were out in the country. And as an American, I have to absolutely believe that it was by design that the only Dunkin' in the entire airport was directly adjacent to the flight departing to none other than New York JFK Airport. I actually was lucky to get a view of my Star Alliance A330 that took me in here from Buenos Aires not too long ago on the same day here. I didn't get a great view of it departing Buenos Aires or arriving here, so I was happy to get a quick view of that. At the far end was basically all the flights going to the United States, but there is also a food court that we were able to take advantage of, and across from that actually was a super nice area for you to get a sleeper pod. So if you are here on a longer layover and you need a place to rest, it was a pretty cheap and affordable way to get a quick rest. And without further ado, it was time to head upstairs to the Avianca Lounge and see what it had available for us. Now, an interesting note about this, I did mention that technically we are not a business class traveler. Even though we are in their business class seats, we weren't on legs that they marketed these seats as business class. So for us, this actually was a paid lounge access. However, for myself, I was able to get access through my Star Alliance Gold priority. But without that priority, even in this seat, I would have had to pay the entrance fee to get in. The only people with free access to this is people with Star Alliance priority, or people flying in the business class cabins for basically trans-oceanic flights, so the ones that go from here to places in Europe. Got my stamp from the counter and headed on into the lounge, and one of the things that I'm usually somewhat worried about on these paid access lounges is overcrowding, and I didn't actually find that to be too much of an issue here in the lounge, which was pretty nice. An always nice feature, especially when an airline does have long-haul flights, is a kid area, especially in the lounge area, so these kids can come in here and get all of their energy out before getting on a flight that could potentially be crossing an ocean depending on where you're heading. For me, however, after a long day of travel and spending some time in Bogota, I decided to take a quick advantage of the shower services here in El Dorado's Avianca Lounge before heading off to my gate. I got one of Avianca's 3 shower suites here in the El Dorado Lounge. The amenities and towels were pretty basic, but that was basically what I expected coming into here, and the shower suite was about par for the course as far as shower suites around the world go. The shower, however, was absolutely fantastic. The temperature was fantastic, the water pressure was awesome, and they had a large number of nozzles to choose between when it came to the settings and where you wanted that water to come out from. It was an excellent place to rest up and freshen up before getting some food and getting on board my flight to Los Angeles. Now, directly across from the shower suite was the main hangout area. They had the food and they had the seating for the main area, and I did take advantage of that and got a full lunch before getting on board my flight. Unfortunately, I do have to say that the food was a little bit subpar as far as lounge class food goes. That being said, we do have to keep in mind that this is not an exclusive business class lounge. This is a paid access lounge that all passengers have access to. So if we're going by those standards, it really wasn't all that bad. It had plenty of food to keep me tied over, even if I didn't get food on the airplane, which I did anyway. For the wonderful and ever so sought after Colombian coffee, we actually have to head around the corner from the food, where we're going to go to the espresso machine or coffee machine and get whatever coffee you're desiring. And if coffee's not your itch, then underneath that there is a fridge that has normal soft drinks and sodas and juice options for everyone else. I went with the ever so fantastic one of everything technique, where you get one of each sandwich, one of each bowls of fruit, one of each cookies, and one coffee to go along with that. The food wasn't fantastic, but as far as the paid access lounge food standard is, it really wasn't all that bad. But after I ate that up, it was time for me to head off to my gate and get on board my 787 to Los Angeles. Getting to the gate though, however, I realized there was no plane waiting for me despite boarding time creeping up upon us. This was kind of strange considering the plane had arrived earlier that morning from Madrid and should already have been serviced and everything long before we got here. Shortly thereafter though, I saw the tug coming around the corner with our 787-8 of Avianca's paint scheme pulling into our gate, and with the Colombian mountains as a backdrop, it was a fantastic view of this airplane. Boarding was honestly kind of a mess. They were trying to call groups and trying to call different pre-boarding groups, and it was just kind of not going all that well. One thing I did like, however, was this semi-open jet bridge. You can see the panels here, they were all at a slight tilt, and on today's weather they actually were cracked open ever so slightly to allow a fresh air breeze passing through the jet bridge. As we stepped into the airplane, they actually were pulling certain people out for random screening. I was one of those people. They pulled me aside, they went through my bag to make sure I wasn't bringing in anything I shouldn't be bringing into the United States. They checked all my documents to make sure I was in order, and it was all pretty harmless before I was able to continue on board this flight. Shortly thereafter, we arrived in a 121 configuration here in Avianca's business class cabin on the 787. I was going to be in seat 3A today, which was a window seat. All window seats had the same configuration as far as closeness to the window versus the aisle, so nothing really to prefer there. However, the middle seats with the 2 configuration were better for couples. However, as I always like to think, you can see each other on the ground. Might as well enjoy your window view while you can. And while the 787 business class seat was definitely far better than what we had on the A330 from Buenos Aires, it was definitely subpar as far as what you'd expect luxury-wise on the 787, considering you see a similar configuration on a lot of other 787s. In front of me here, there was plenty of space to store my feet, but really no space to store a bag, so keep that in mind, I guess, as far as storage goes. In addition, there was this weird plastic panel, which I guess acted as another footrest if you weren't all the way reclined. However, it was just kind of a strange fit. Down below here you can see the air vent, and similar to the A330, it was just not a totally clean seat. I am definitely starting to miss the COVID days when these planes were detailed inside and out to make sure that they were as spotless as can be. On the left side by the window there was a little bit of storage. You can see here a cubby to hang the headphones that they passed out a little bit later, as well as space to store other things, which is where I threw my chargers. Next to that is actually the universal charging port where you could use that, a headset plug, a USB port, a full functioning remote, and the seat controls as well. On your right side here, there was more storage. However, it did take me quite a while to actually figure out how to open it. I couldn't really figure out if I was supposed to raise this, lower it, fold it up, fold it down. It wasn't until later in the flight that someone actually showed me how to open this cubby. Unfortunately, on this flight, we were given the same rock-hard headset that we were given on the previous flight on the A330. On this flight, I did try and use my personal headphones, hoping they'd be a little bit better. However, they weren't actually working with the headset jack, so I was forced to use these. These also, however, you could see, were fairly dirty and worn. As you would expect with this airplane, the TV is the fold-out kind, so it's stashed in the seat in front of you, and to watch it you have to fold it out here. There was kind of a glare, so the 787's dimming windows did make that a little bit better. However, the drawback of that is that you do have to stow it for takeoff and landing, so if you are watching something, that's time for you to pause your movie. Taking a look at the in-flight entertainment, it did actually vary slightly from that of which we found on the A330. However, the selection was somewhat similar in the sense that I didn't have a whole lot of stuff to watch and I was running low by the time we got to Los Angeles. Had I been taking a flight across the ocean to somewhere like Madrid, where these flights head sometimes, I'm not quite sure I would have had enough TV shows or movies of my own liking without exploring a little bit more. Now, it is worth noting that as futuristic as the 787 is, this airplane actually did not have Wi-Fi available to us the entire flight, so the in-flight entertainment system was just that much more important. Now, for those of you who maybe are a little less familiar with Avianca as we taxi out here, in case I haven't mentioned it before, Avianca is actually a very close second as far as the world's oldest airlines go, behind only KLM. As we taxied around, they did have plenty of homage to their roots, including this heritage livery of their A320, which was super cool considering that growing up in the San Francisco area, I saw plenty of these planes in a TACA livery flying between San Francisco and El Salvador. Looking at the weather report, there was a thunderstorm of all thunderstorms forecasted to roll in any moment now. You can see it here approaching from the south. So as we taxied out and awaited our takeoff, it was only a matter of time before that storm hit, and so it was us versus the weather. One thing that I still cannot believe is not a standard on some of these long-haul airplanes, but I was appreciating having on this flight, was the individual air vents overhead your seat. We actually had two, even though there was only one seat in my configuration here. Another thing to my left side was the cup holder here, which I had to assume was only there to hold the passport and the Oreos that they passed out. After that, I was playing around with the remote a little bit. Now, the remote on the 787 actually did have quite a lot of functions, as it served as almost a secondary screen, which was fantastic while I was sleeping, and I was able to use it to play, pause, skip, and even pull up a secondary in-flight map to avoid having to turn off whatever I was watching. Avianca loves foldable things, right? Here is your foldable armrest that pops out and twists. I was fortunate to figure that out by watching the passenger next to me. In addition to that, you obviously also have your fold-out tray table. And in addition to that, I even had a footrest that folded right off where we're supposed to be. Now, an interesting thing that I noticed on board this airplane is all the window seats have 2 windows per seat. And by adjusting the dimmability on one window, you are actually dimming both windows at the same time, which was nice to not have to reach all the way forward to dim the second window. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it was an absolute treat to be able to sit back and watch my seatback TV and check in on the map on the remote every once in a while to just see how far we were along our journey. It was kind of nice. It almost acted as a secondary screen along the entire flight. Well, as is the standard, they basically have 3 presets on this seat. They have the upright, the lie flat, and the in-between, which is the relax mode as far as the seat goes. An interesting thing with Avianca on this flight, considering that, remember, it is technically an economy flight, just with an upgraded seat, you actually do not get pillows or blankets, so sleeping is going to be a little bit tougher unless you brought your own stuff. So keep that in mind. In addition to no pillows or blankets, there was also no amenity kit, which I can obviously live without. It does look like they give these out on their longer haul trans-oceanic flights, but don't expect an amenity kit if you are on these within the America flights. One thing to make note of is that if you do put your seat in the full lie flat position, the footrest that reclines does not actually level out with the footrest that exists for a full sleeping position. Then they came around with our meal on a nice little tray. Remember, this is an economy class flight, so everybody on board gets the exact same meal, which was just a meat and rice, along with these chocolate chip cookies. One thing that I definitely found fascinating was the placemat that was on our tray, which served to show us all of Avianca's destinations that at least fit on board this tray. As we watched the sun set over Baja California, we were offered a pre-departure snack, which was just some nice cassava puff chips, and along with that was a nice water. Now, I promise this will be the last thing I say about it, but I just had so much fun on this flight, fully setting up and using my TV remote control as a secondary screen to control my TV, as well as using it to also view the map. Now, one thing that was kind of interesting is that they did actually have an entire video explaining how to clear customs in Los Angeles and how to make connecting flights if that applied to you. As we arrive into the Sunset Los Angeles basin here in Los Angeles, California, one thing I do want to point out is that you'll notice the lights in the cabin are on at the moment, and if you watch the time lapse all the way to landing, those lights actually did not come off the entire descent we had down. As we taxi in, it's that time to reflect on the flight and Avianca as a whole. As it comes down to it, I really don't think their business class product really matches up with that you'll find on the transatlantic flights that they offer. And if you are flying within the Americas, keep in mind that your business class seat is not a business class seat per se. You are just paying for an economy ticket with an upgraded seat. Now I will say, don't expect too much out of the economy seat, but it is definitely far better as far as value, as far as the other economy options if you are traveling between South America and North America. Keep in mind that you are paying for an upgrade seat, but considering I only paid about $500 for the lie flat seat on both flights, I would call the value absolutely fantastic. Now, the question is, would I fly it again? Personally, the value is so worth it that if I needed to get down to South America on a budget, I could definitely see myself flying it again. But if the luxury of business class is what I'm looking for, Avianca really isn't what you're looking for. And when push comes to shove, some of the airplanes are just getting a little bit outdated, and it might be time for a revamp. And as our plane prepares to head back out to Bogota and we head out to the curb here in Los Angeles International Airport, I just want to thank each and every one of you stopping by to watch. I hope you enjoyed this 2 parts in 1 trip report on the Avianca, both A330 and 787 in the not so business class configuration, and I hope you stay posted for some more upcoming videos that I have coming up for you.